I always knew the countdown would mean more to me than to Kai. Every morning he'd cross off another square on the fridge calendar, his handwriting crooked and eager, like his heart couldn't wait to catch up with his dreams. "Only 72 more days, Dad," he'd say, bouncing on the edge of his seat, his breakfast barely touched. And every time, I'd nod, try to smile, and say something like, "We're getting close, buddy," even though each tick of time twisted inside my chest. His excitement made it harder to breathe, not easier, because I knew how fragile our plan was. 2 years of double shifts at the mill, side jobs on weekends, scraping by on instant noodles and coupons. Every dollar I didn't spend was a dollar I put into that surgery fund. $122,000. It was the number I fell asleep repeating, and the one I woke up chasing. That afternoon, I finally had a rare moment to sit down. The machines at the mill had broken down and the shift was cut early. It was quiet in the house, Kai was at school, and for once, I let myself breathe. I opened my laptop, logged into the fund account, planning to double-check everything. It had become a nervous habit, like patting your pocket to make sure your wallet's still there. I'd done it a dozen times before. But this time, when the page loaded, my heart stopped. Balance, $0. At first, I thought it had to be a glitch. I refreshed the page. Again. I logged out, logged back in, clicked into the transaction history, hoping maybe it was just a weird formatting error or some delayed maintenance update. But there they were, withdrawals. Large ones. Transfers to an unfamiliar account. All of it gone. No. I stared at the screen, my body frozen. I couldn't breathe. My vision narrowed until the edges of the laptop blurred. The numbers didn't make sense. The dates, the withdrawals started a week ago. The largest one, nearly the entire fund, was transferred out 3 days ago. I pressed my palms into my eyes like maybe I'd wake up, that this was some exhaustion-induced nightmare. But when I looked again, it was still gone. Panic rushed in like floodwaters. I stumbled up from the table, pacing, gripping the back of my neck, trying to understand. Who could have done this? The account had a password. 2-step verification. It wasn't public. It wasn't something you could guess. My laptop, only Kai and I used it. I barely even checked my email on my phone. I kept things secure. I had to. Then my mind started spiraling toward recent memories. A few weeks back, I noticed my laptop was open when I came home. I thought I'd left it that way. And then there was the night my browser history showed a few strange sites, travel sites, ticket booking services, foreign currency exchanges. I chalked it up to pop-up ads. Maybe a stray click from Kai looking up Pokemon cards. But now, my stomach turned. Who's had access? The answer came slowly at first, like something I didn't want to see. I thought about Melina, my sister, dropping by with her teenage son, Tanner. He'd been staying with her for the last few months, taking a break from life, as he put it. Tanner had always been charismatic, full of charm and bad decisions. He'd been in the house more than a few times while Melina ran errands. I'd caught him once asking Kai questions, innocent ones at the time. "So your surgery's coming up, huh? That's a lot of money. Your dad must be working like crazy." I remembered thinking it was odd then, but not enough to confront him. He'd even borrowed the laptop once, said his phone was dead and he needed to check an email about a job interview. My knees buckled as I sat back down. My fingers hovered above the keyboard as I logged into my email, my bank, anything that could show more. I clicked through account access history, and sure enough, there were IP addresses I didn't recognize. Logged in from a cafe downtown. Once from a different state entirely. But the first access? Right here. My house. The timestamp lined up exactly with the day Tanner stayed over while I worked late at the mill. I clenched my fists so tight my knuckles cracked. Not Tanner. Not family. But the pieces kept falling into place whether I liked it or not. Kai came through the door not long after, his face glowing as always. "Dad." I drew a picture of me after the surgery. "Want to see?" He held up a scribbled crayon sketch, himself running with both legs straight and strong, a big smile on his face. I swallowed down the rage boiling inside. "That's amazing, buddy," I said, my voice a strained whisper. I taped the picture to the fridge beside the calendar. He didn't know. Not yet. But the miles between today and the dream he'd drawn had just stretched out farther than ever. And I had no idea how I was going to bring him back to that finish line. But I would. I had to. I hadn't slept the night before. Not really. I just stared at the ceiling, counting backwards from $122,000 and wondering what piece of my soul I'd have to sell to put that money back. The knot in my stomach hadn't loosened. not even a little. I called the bank first thing, filed a fraud report, and was met with sympathy, a case number, in the same line I'd heard before, "We'll investigate." But since the access came from a recognized device, this may fall under shared access liability. In other words, don't hold your breath. I sat in the kitchen, nursing cold coffee, the sun barely up, and opened my phone to distract myself from the sense of collapse. Instagram was still logged in. I hadn't posted in months, never had the energy for filters and captions when every minute not spent at work was spent being dad. But I scrolled, mostly out of habit, until something caught my eye. Tanner. His profile popped up because he'd tagged Melina in a new post. My thumb hovered over it, then tapped. The image almost knocked the air out of me. He was lounging in a first-class seat, feet up, champagne in hand, grinning like life had finally gone his way. Designer hoodie, Louis Vuitton duffel bag at his feet, mirrored sunglasses inside the cabin like he was too famous to care. The caption read, "Needed a reset. Paris, here I come." I blinked hard, trying to make it make sense. Another photo followed, Tanner standing in front of a glossy duty-free wall, arms spread wide like some kind of conqueror. First class only. It's called taste. The timestamps hit me like a slap. They matched almost exactly with when the funds were drained. The same day, within hours. And now he was halfway across the world, popping bottles in the clouds while my son's future sat empty and gasping at the bottom of a zero balance. I didn't want to believe it. I really didn't. But the more I looked, the more it added up. The comments from his friends didn't help. "Brew you ballin' now? Who sponsored this trip? Asking for my broke self. Tell us your secrets." I wanted to reach through the screen and grab him, shake him until he understood what he'd done, what he'd taken. But all I could do was sit there, heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat of betrayal, and feel the fury rise in waves. I picked up the phone and called Melina. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy. "Logan, it's barely 7. Have you seen Tanner's Instagram?" Silence. Then, "No, why?" "Check it. Now." I could hear the rustle of her moving, the tap of her phone unlocking. Then a sharp inhale. "You've got to be kidding me," she whispered. "That's where my son's surgery money went," I said, my voice trembling. "To fund his vacation. His luxury. His damn champagne." "But," he said, he was working on getting a job, that he needed space to clear his head. "He cleared my bank account, Melina. He asked about the surgery. He used my laptop. He knew." She didn't say anything for a long time, just breathing on the other end. Then finally, a quiet, "I didn't know, Logan. I swear. If I had, I know. I don't think you did. But he did. And he used me. He used Kai. That was the worst part. Not just the theft. The fact that he sat across from my son, smiled at him, maybe even encouraged him to keep hoping, while knowing full well that he was robbing him blind." I opened the comments again. One image stood out now more than ever. Tanner flashing a passport, tagged at Charles de Gaulle Airport. The timestamp was 12 hours after the largest withdrawal. I went into my email, checking the security logs again. The access came from my house. The laptop. Same day. He was there. The betrayal had fingerprints now. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. Police? Maybe. But if they called it shared access, I had a sinking feeling it wouldn't go far. I needed to gather everything. Bank statements, device logs, screenshots, social media posts. I couldn't just be angry. I had to be exact. But as I sat there, jaw clenched, scrolling through more of Tanner's vacation pics. Eiffel Tower selfies, macarons on silver trays, captions about living the dream, something shifted in me. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't even just about betrayal. This was about Kai. Because while Tanner was out there pretending to be somebody, my son was here, circling numbers on a calendar, dreaming of running, of chasing kites and kicking soccer balls and walking into second grade without a brace. I had promised him that day would come, and I wasn't about to let a first-class thief take that from him. It was one of those quiet afternoons, the kind that sneak up on you after too many days of noise and crisis. I was in the middle of comparing bank statements, highlighting the exact days the money had disappeared, building my paper trail, my case, my lifeline to justice, when I heard Kai's small, excited voice call from the living room. "Dad, look what Tanner gave me." I froze. I hadn't said his name aloud in days. Hadn't dared. The anger was too fresh, too sharp, too close to the surface. I walked out, hoping maybe, just maybe, it was something harmless. But when I saw what Kai was holding, my breath caught. A small, Shiny Eiffel Tower keychain gleamed in his hand, the metal catching the afternoon light like it was mocking me. He said it's from the real Paris, Kai said, practically vibrating with happiness. He said he picked it out just for me. I didn't respond right away. Couldn't. My eyes were locked on that tiny souvenir. It was cheap, maybe $10 tops, but to me, it might as well have been made from the shards of Kai's stolen future. I forced a smile. That's really nice of him, I managed to say, even as bile rose in my throat. Kai ran off to put it on his backpack, humming like his world was still intact. And I just stood there, fist clenched so tight I thought my nails might draw blood. That keychain told me everything I already knew, and still, somehow, made it worse. It wasn't just that Tanner had stolen the money. It was that he had the audacity to come back, to look my son in the eyes, and pretend to care. To hand him a trinket like it made up for anything. Like this was just a vacation, not a life sentence for a 7-year-old boy who had already waited too long for his chance to walk, to run, to be free. That night, after Kai went to bed, I sat in the kitchen with my laptop. The Eiffel Tower keychain sat beside me, taunting me. I stared at it for a long time before finally opening a video call. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I needed to see Tanner's face when I asked him what the hell he'd done. To my surprise, he answered. His face appeared on the screen, smug, sun-kissed, and totally unbothered. He was in a hotel room in Paris, by the look of it. There was art on the walls, French lettering on a menu in the background, and the unmistakable glow of someone who thought they'd gotten away with something. Yo, Uncle L, he said, like we were still on friendly terms. Didn't expect a call. Everything good? No, Tanner, I said, my voice low and steady. Everything's not good. You stole from me. You stole from Kai. You drained the surgery fund. And then you had the nerve to give him a souvenir from the trip you took with his money. His eyes darted slightly, just for a second, but he didn't flinch. Didn't apologize. Just leaned back in his chair like this was all some minor misunderstanding. You're being dramatic, he said, actually smiling. He's a kid. He'll bounce back. It's not like. Stop. I slammed my fist on the table and the keychain jumped. Do you have any idea what that money was for? Do you even care? He rolled his eyes. Look, I needed a reset. You don't understand what it's like, man. I've been under pressure for months. No direction, no purpose, just surviving. You have a job. You have structure. I don't. I needed to breathe. You needed to breathe, I repeated, stunned. So you suffocated a 7-year-old's future to do it? He didn't respond. I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back, or before I reached through the screen in a blind rage. Then I got to work. I opened every bank document, every login history, every scrap of evidence I'd collected so far. Screenshots of his social media posts. The timestamps. His smiling face in first class. The shopping bags. The champagne. I even included a close-up of the damn keychain, with a caption, gifted to my son with the money meant to heal him. This wasn't just theft. This was betrayal. Arrogant, calculated betrayal. I started a file. Not just for the police, though I'd try that route again, but for anyone who needed to know exactly who Tanner Barrett was. If he ever tried to claim innocence, I'd have receipts. And then I texted Melina. We need to talk. I have everything. She called 2 minutes later, her voice shaking. I'm so sorry, Logan. I had no idea, but I believe you now. Whatever you need, I'm in. I looked over at the keychain. It was so small, so worthless, and yet it had lit a fire I wasn't going to put out. Good, I said, because we're just getting started. The worst part wasn't losing the money. It wasn't even the betrayal, it was having to look Kai in the eyes and take away something I promised. Something he'd clung to, believed in, counted toward with an innocent hope I'd worked every day to protect. The moment I stepped into his room, my stomach knotted so tight I thought I might vomit. He was sitting cross-legged on his bed, cutting stars out of yellow paper, taping them onto the wall above his calendar like they were constellations guiding him toward surgery day. Hey, buddy, I said softly. He looked up, smiling. Did you talk to the hospital? Is it still happening? 70 days left. I sank onto the edge of his bed, tried to find words I didn't have. Kai, there's been a little delay. We're going to have to reschedule the surgery for later. His brow furrowed, eyes blinking slowly, like he didn't understand the language I was speaking. But we were almost there. I know, and I'm so proud of how patient you've been. But something happened with the money. It's gone right now, but I promise I'll fix it. His mouth opened and closed. Then he whispered, We don't get the surgery? Not yet. But we will. I swear to you. But why? His voice cracked. Did I do something wrong? That shattered me. I pulled him into my arms, holding him tighter than I ever had. No, you didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault. You're the strongest person I know. I don't know how long we sat there like that, his tiny arms around my neck, the stars on the wall looking down like they were disappointed too. Eventually, he fell asleep, his head resting on my chest. I stayed there until the sun dipped below the horizon and the calendar squares faded into the shadows. The next day, I took the file of evidence I'd compiled to the police. They listened. They nodded. They reviewed the documents. And then the detective, a tired-looking man with thinning hair, sighed and slid the file back to me. Because the access happened from your own devices and the money was voluntarily moved, this is going to fall under civil jurisdiction, he said. It's not that we don't believe you, Mr. Barrett. It's just, legally, this isn't fraud. It's a personal dispute. Personal, I said, trying not to raise my voice. He stole from a child. That's not personal. That's criminal. I agree it's awful, he said. But you'll need to file a civil suit. There's not much else we can do from our side. I left the station shaking. Not from fear, fury. I played by the rules. Worked, saved, sacrificed. And still, it wasn't enough. That night, Melina came over. She looked wrecked, her hair in a messy bun, circles under her eyes, phone in hand. She'd started calling around, asking questions, trying to get the truth out of Tanner. The story she heard made my head spin. He told Aunt Mari you gave him the money, she said, pacing the kitchen. Told Uncle Reese it was a loan. He even told Mom and Dad that it was a family thing. You know, like a group decision to help him restart his life. I stared at her. He said all that? She nodded, furious. And some of them bought it. Others just stayed quiet. I don't know what they believe anymore. That was the thing about family. They want peace more than truth. And peace, sometimes, meant pretending someone like Tanner hadn't burned down the house with everyone inside. But I couldn't pretend. Not for Kai. Not for myself. Let them stay quiet, I said, pulling out a new notepad. I'm done chasing their approval. We've got dates, times, documents. I'm filing the civil suit. If the law won't protect us, I will. Melina sat down across from me. I'll help however I can. You sure? I asked. This could split everything wide open. She met my eyes. He used my home, my trust. He lied to all of us. He robbed you, and Kai. I'm not staying neutral. For the first time in days, I felt something stronger than anger. Resolve. I wasn't helpless. I was a father. And a father fights. I stayed up until 2 that night, organizing every statement, every screenshot. I printed everything, sorted it into folders, even added dates from my phone calendar when Tanner had been over. I made a timeline of his Instagram posts, matching them to transaction withdrawals. The evidence wasn't just solid, it was damning. The next morning, as Kai sat at the kitchen table coloring a dragon with wings that looked suspiciously like sneakers, I looked at him and made a silent vow. No matter how long it takes, no matter how ugly it gets, I will get you back your chance to run. I didn't go to the dinner. Couldn't. Even the idea of being in the same room as Tanner, hearing him speak, watching him smile, seeing him wear the mask he'd always been good at crafting, made my blood run hot. Melina tried to convince me. Said it would be good to show the family we weren't afraid of the truth, that we weren't the ones who needed to hide. But I told her I'd rather claw my way through another year of double shifts than sit at a table pretending to share bread with a thief. Still, she went. Not just as a guest, but as a witness. The dinner was Tanner's latest stunt, a Paris-themed party in the family's event room. Real white linen. Candles. Little menus with French names none of them could pronounce. I heard he wore a blazer with gold buttons and had Edith Piaf playing through a Bluetooth speaker. The photos would have made any stranger believe he was someone worth knowing. Melina kept her phone tucked into the cloth napkin on her lap, recording. She'd become just as disgusted as me after everything we'd pieced together. We were no longer just gathering evidence. We were building a reckoning. When she came over after the party, her eyes were blazing. She dropped into the chair across from me at the kitchen table and handed me her phone. You're going to want to watch this, she said. I pressed play. The video started mid-toast. Tanner stood, champagne glass in hand, a smug grin plastered across his face. The table around him chuckled as he waved one hand like he was making some grand declaration. Here's to new beginnings, he said, pausing for dramatic effect. To second chances. To beautiful cities, even if you have to borrow a little faith, and maybe a few funds to get there. More laughter. And then he raised his glass high and said it. Shout out to Uncle Logan's savings account. The table roared. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. I felt my jaw clench so tight my teeth hurt. The casual cruelty of it. The way they laughed. Like he hadn't stolen anything real. Like this was just a quirky anecdote. A harmless joke at the expense of a man who could barely afford groceries some weeks while scraping together every dime for his kid. Melina reached across the table and grabbed my hand. You have this now, she said. You have it on video. He admitted it. In front of everyone. I stared at the screen. My own nephew. Laughing about robbing his cousin of the chance to walk freely. And no one at the table told him to stop. No one even flinched. What did the others say afterward? I asked. Some laughed awkwardly. Some just changed the subject. But no one challenged him. I nodded slowly. That's all I needed to know. Melina took a breath. There's something else. Tanner's about to start a job. Small local accounting firm. Starts in 2 weeks. He's been bragging about it. Says he's turning his life around. Being respectable now. Accounting. I repeated bitterly. That's rich. She nodded. I already have screenshots of his posts about it. Job offer letter and a story he forgot to delete. You want me to send it? I looked at her, felt the weight of the moment settle in my chest. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure there were consequences. He'd taken from my son, and now he wanted to walk into a job where people would trust him with their money? No, I said. Don't send it. Her eyebrows lifted. No, I'll send it. With everything else. She slid her phone across the table. Then let's make it count. We worked through the night. Screenshots, video files, statements, timelines. We built a package too clear to deny. I drafted the email slowly, with intention. Addressed it to the HR director of the accounting firm, attaching the evidence with subject line. Urgent, ethics concern regarding new hire, Tanner Barrett. No emotion. Just facts. His own words. His digital trail. The toast. The laughter. I hovered over the send button for a few seconds. Then I clicked. It was done. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion hitting me like a wave. Melina watched me in silence, then finally asked, Do you feel better? No, I said. But I feel like we finally struck back. She nodded. Then it's a start. Outside, the streetlights flickered against the windows, casting long shadows across Kai's calendar still hanging on the fridge. He'd stopped counting the days, but I hadn't. I was counting every one Tanner had stolen. And now, I was taking them back, one consequence at a time. The response came faster than I expected. Less than 24 hours after I sent the email to Tanner's future employer, my inbox pinged with a message marked confidential. Tanner Barrett application. The tone was professional, but the meaning was unmistakable. They thanked me for bringing the matter to their attention, confirmed they'd reviewed the materials, and stated that Tanner would no longer be considered for the position. No other explanation. They didn't need to give one. I stared at the screen for a long time after. No satisfaction. Just the quiet weight of something shifting into place. One piece of accountability in a puzzle still full of empty spots. Tanner must have found out within hours, because by nightfall, chaos arrived on my doorstep. It was just after 8. Kai was brushing his teeth. I was in the kitchen, sorting mail, when headlights swept across the front window. Then came the slamming car door, fast footsteps up the porch stairs, and the sharp pound of a fist on the door. Logan, Tanner's voice, unmistakable. Loud, slurred, angry. Open the damn door. I froze, the mail sliding from my hand. My heart kicked up. I stepped into the hallway just as Kai poked his head out from the bathroom. Dad? Who's yelling? Stay in there, buddy, I said quickly. Keep the door closed, okay? He nodded, eyes wide, and disappeared again. Tanner pounded again. I know it was you. You think you can just ruin my life? Huh. Think you're some kind of hero now. I opened the door just enough to block his view inside. He stood there on the porch, red-faced, eyes wild, fists clenched. His hair was messy, clothes wrinkled, like he hadn't expected to get this far and now didn't know what to do with himself. You need to leave, I said coldly. You think you're better than me? He shouted. You think you're some righteous martyr? You stole my future. I stepped out, closing the door behind me. No, Tanner. I protected someone else's. He laughed, sharp and bitter. You cost me everything. My job, my reputation. You did that, I snapped. You did it when you stole from a child, when you mocked it in front of people, when you handed Kai a souvenir like it was some kind of trade. For a second, his face crumbled, like maybe some part of him saw it. But then the anger surged back, louder than anything else. "I'll sue," he growled. "Defamation or slander or whatever the hell this is. You think you can just ruin my life and walk away?" I didn't flinch. "Go ahead. I have everything on record. You want the truth in court? Fine. Let's do that." Before he could respond, red and blue lights lit up the street. A neighbor must have called. The police cruiser pulled up fast. 2 officers stepped out, calm but firm. I turned to them as they approached. "This man is trespassing," I said, "and threatening my family." They separated us quickly, pulling Tanner aside, asking him questions. He kept shouting, pointing at me, claiming I was destroying him. But it didn't matter. They saw the madness behind his eyes. They saw the fear in mine. Eventually, they escorted him off the property. One officer stayed back to speak with me. "If he comes back, don't hesitate to file for a protective order," she said. "You've got a kid in the house." I nodded, hands still shaking. "Thank you." After they left, I sat on the couch, head in my hands. Kai came out quietly, eyes full of questions. "Was that Tanner?" "Yeah," I said gently. "But everything's okay." The police made sure he left. He nodded slowly, then crawled into my lap, curling up against me like he had when he was little. "I don't want him to come here again," he whispered. "He won't," I promised. "I won't let him." The next day, Melina shared the video from the dinner party with Tanner's parents, Jordan and Dee. I hadn't spoken to them in weeks. They'd stayed quiet through all of this, probably unsure what to believe or how to face what their son had done. But the video changed everything. It wasn't just the joke, or the toast, or the smugness, it was the way everyone else reacted. The way it laid bare how far Tanner had gone, and how blind everyone had been. Dee called first. Her voice was shaky. "We had no idea. He told us you offered it as a gift. That it was part of some family plan." "It wasn't," I said, voice flat. "I know now," she said. We're going to make this right. Jordan and I are taking control of his finances. Every item he bought, bags, clothes, electronics, we're reselling all of it. The money will go straight back to the surgery fund." I didn't thank her. Not yet. I just said, "Good." Tanner didn't take it well. Over the next few days, his social media spiraled. Posts dripping with guiltless fury, cryptic quotes about betrayal and enemies wearing family faces. He played the victim so hard I almost believed he was trying to convince himself too. But no one was buying it. The likes stopped coming. Comments were gone. Messages dried up. It was like the curtain had finally fallen, and behind it, he was just a scared boy who'd built a life on lies and couldn't stand when the truth caught up. I didn't watch his stories anymore. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long time, the story I was living, the one with Kai, was finally moving forward. The invitation came by text, short, polite, laced with the formality of someone trying to pretend things hadn't shattered. "Family dinner at Granddad's. Sunday, 5 p.m. Hope you can come." No name, no tone, just the assumption that I'd show up. That after everything, I'd sit at the same table with the people who had either looked away or looked through me while my son's future was stripped clean. I didn't answer. Not right away. But I kept reading it over and over, thinking about how it used to be. Sunday dinners were sacred growing up. A table full of steaming plates, laughter, teasing, arguments that never got too sharp. Granddad Silas at the head, hands folded like a judge ready to weigh in on whatever nonsense we were all debating that week. He was the one everyone listened to. Even now, past 80, his words still carried weight. So I went. Not because I wanted to. Because I had to know if the people who raised us, who raised him, were finally willing to see the truth. When I walked in with Kai at my side, the room fell quiet for a beat too long. The smell of roast chicken and fresh bread didn't do much to soften the stiffness. Tanner was already there, seated toward the far end of the table, next to Jordan and Dee, his eyes shadowed with something between anger and desperation. He didn't look at me. Not once. Melina gave me a quick nod as I slid into a chair. Kai sat beside me, swinging his legs under the table, the tension completely lost on him. He leaned toward me and whispered, "Can I have 2 rolls?" I managed a small smile. "Go for it." Dinner started the way these things always did, too polite, too careful. No one mentioned anything real. There was talk of weather, someone's promotion, a cousin's new baby. Tanner stayed quiet, his plate mostly untouched, fiddling with his fork like he was waiting for a cue. It came about halfway through, right after dessert was served. Silas cleared his throat, the room quieting like it always had around him. He sat upright in his chair, wearing that familiar expression, The one that said he wasn't going to dance around a damn thing. I want to say something, he said, voice steady and deep. About what's happened. Tanner finally looked up. Just a flicker. But it was enough. Silas's gaze swept across the table, pausing briefly on each of us before landing on Tanner. We've always believed in family, he began. We've forgiven mistakes, given grace. But what happened here wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A selfish, calculated one. Tanner's jaw tensed. You stole from your cousin, Silas continued. You lied to your uncle, to your parents, to all of us. And then you had the audacity to celebrate it, to laugh about it. Like it was funny. Like it was nothing. Granddad, Tanner started. But Silas raised a hand. No. You had your turn to talk. Now you listen. The silence was sharp. You chose handbags over your cousin's legs, he said bluntly. You chose first class over first steps. And you disgraced this family while doing it. I held my breath. Tanner's face crumpled. Just for a second. His carefully rehearsed defenses cracked. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Just a shaky breath, and then silence. Melina set her fork down gently. We're not pretending anymore, Tanner. We're done. That broke something. Tanner stood suddenly, chair scraping back, eyes wild. You all think you're better than me, he snapped. You think I haven't been punished enough? I lost everything. You lost what you stole, I said quietly. There's a difference. His gaze snapped to mine. You think this is justice? Ruining my life? Making me look like some monster online? You did that yourself, Melina said. You posted it. You bragged. Jordan tried to pull Tanner back into his seat, but he shook him off. You all just want someone to blame. You don't care what I was going through. Silas shook his head. What you were going through doesn't excuse what you did. Tanner's breathing grew shallow. You're all pathetic. And then he walked out. The front door slammed moments later, followed by the sound of his car peeling out of the driveway. Nobody moved. Nobody chased him. Silas finally turned to me. Logan, I'm sorry it took this long to say it. What he did was unforgivable. And if there's anything I can do to support you, and Kai, you let me know. I nodded once. Words felt inadequate. Later that week, I filed the civil suit. We had everything. The video, the bank records, the social media. Tanner tried to post another string of dramatic stories, more blame, more twisted versions of events, but this time, no one engaged. No comments. No shares. No defense. The tide had turned. The pedestal had finally broken. And I wasn't done. Because this wasn't about destroying him. It was about rebuilding what he'd tried to take from my son. You don't always hear the moment when someone becomes irrelevant, but you can feel it. Like the background static that's always buzzed suddenly goes quiet. That's how it felt with Tanner. After the dinner at Granddad's, after he stormed out with the last of his dignity trailing behind him, the family finally stopped pretending. No more vague, he's going through something whispers. No more guilt-ridden silence. The pedestal was gone, and all that was left was a young man with empty hands and a legacy of wreckage. The civil suit was filed. The papers had been served. I didn't expect it to move quickly, it never does. But it felt good knowing that something official, something concrete, was finally in motion. Meanwhile, Tanner was spiraling faster than I could track. Every job interview he landed ended the same way. A simple Google search of his name would pull up the toast video Melina had discreetly leaked after the family dinner. His social accounts were still public. Still loud. And now, they were working against him. He started deleting things in chunks, photos of Paris, comments bragging about his luxury restart. But it was too late. The internet never really forgets, and neither did the people who mattered. Jordan and Dee, to their credit, held their line. After months of covering for him, they finally said enough. He was cut off, financially and otherwise, unless he agreed to therapy and restitution. No exceptions. No loopholes. They even changed the locks on their home. Tanner responded exactly the way I expected him to. He snapped. It started small, angry texts to Melina, which she blocked. Then more vague Instagram posts with captions like, "Some families destroy more than they build." The old victim card. No one was buying it. Then came the night he showed up at Jordan and Dee's house. They weren't home, but their Ring camera captured the whole thing, him pounding on the door, screaming, then breaking a side window to climb inside. He didn't steal anything. Didn't even take his own leftover things. He just destroyed. Threw a lamp through the TV. Smashed every picture frame in the hallway. Tore his old room apart. By the time they arrived and called the police, he was already gone. They pressed charges. It was the final nail. I didn't feel joy hearing about it. Just a strange, exhausted kind of sadness. Not for him. He made his choices, but for the damage he kept causing in every direction. Like a storm that doesn't know how to pass through without leveling everything in its path. Me? I was done watching the storm. I'd blocked his number weeks ago. Kai's devices were locked tight. No surprise messages, no accidental notifications. We kept our circle small. Tighter. Cleaner. Focused. Because Kai had a new consultation scheduled. A surgeon out of state had agreed to take his case with a slightly modified approach. It wouldn't happen on the original timeline, but it was still possible. We were still in this. Every day, we walked past that fridge calendar, now blank. Kai had stopped drawing stars, but I could see the hope returning slowly, like sun through clouds. He didn't ask every morning anymore, but sometimes he'd catch me looking at the mail and say, "Any news?" And I'd always answer, "We're getting closer." Because we were. Then came the burner accounts. It started with a comment on one of Melina's photos, an anonymous profile with no name, no photo, saying, "Funny how quickly people turn on their own." Then another one popped up on a support group page I'd posted in last year when we were fundraising. Don't believe everything you read. Some dads use their kids as props. We knew it was him. The phrasing, the timing, the twisted sense of self-importance, it was all Tanner. Desperate to rewrite the narrative. Desperate to still be heard. But the thing was, no one was listening anymore. Melina blocked every burner account. So did I. The smear attempts never gained traction. People knew the truth. People had seen the video, the receipts, the timeline. The story wasn't just ours. It had become a quiet cautionary tale for anyone paying attention. And through it all, I kept my eyes on Kai. We didn't talk about Tanner anymore. Not because we were avoiding it, but because it no longer mattered. He didn't own space in our lives. Not in our time. Not in our future. Kai was the future. Every night, I tucked him in and felt the bones of something solid rebuilding beneath us. Not money. Not justice. But trust. Trust in me. In life. In tomorrow. One night, as I pulled the blanket over him, he looked up and asked, "Do you think when I run, I'll be faster than you?" I smiled. "I think you already are." And that's when I knew Tanner could scream into the void all he wanted. But we weren't in the void with him anymore. We were already miles ahead. I didn't hear the car pull up. I was too busy standing in front of the bathroom mirror, helping Kai style the little tuft of hair at the front of his head that never stayed flat, no matter how much water or gel we used. He was giggling as I gave up and fluffed it up instead, calling it his lightning spike. I was smiling too, really smiling for the first time in a while. Then there was a knock on the front door. Not frantic. Not loud. Just steady. I wiped my hands on the towel and told Kai to grab his socks while I answered it. When I opened the door, Jordan and Dee stood there. Dee held an envelope in both hands, her mouth tight but her eyes warm. Jordan nodded politely, and for once, there was no discomfort between us. No tension hanging in the air like a curtain waiting to be pulled down. "Hey," I said cautiously. "Everything okay?" Dee took a breath and held the envelope out to me. "This is the rest," she said. "The final check. It covers everything what Tanner took, plus what we couldn't sell. We're sorry it took time." I stared at it, heavy in her hand. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't reach out and take it. It wasn't just money. It was the weight of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every time I'd lied to Kai's face and said soon, when I didn't know if soon would ever come. "Logan," Jordan said softly, "we know this doesn't fix what he did, but we wanted to make sure you and Kai could move forward." Finally, my fingers closed around the envelope. I didn't say thank you. Not yet. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because words still felt too small for a moment like that. Instead, I just nodded, the pressure building behind my eyes too fast to stop. Kai appeared beside me, hopping on one foot, trying to tug on his sock. "Hey, kiddo," Dee said, crouching down. "Big day coming up soon, huh?" Kai grinned. "Yeah, I'm packing already. I get to take my stuff lying, right, Dad?" I laughed through the tightness in my throat. "Of course you do." Dee's smile faltered for a split second, just long enough for me to see the guilt still rooted behind her kindness, but she nodded and stood up. "We won't keep you." After they left, I stood at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. The check inside was real. Crisp. Signed. I stared at it, then picked up my phone, logged into the fund account, and transferred it in. The numbers finally aligned. The balance was whole again. I called the hospital and confirmed the surgery. Scheduled. Deposits handled. It was happening. Then, like clockwork, Tanner reached out. It started with a message, one of those dramatic walls of text filled with half-hearted remorse and long-winded explanations that tried to wrap shame in the language of personal growth. I've been thinking about everything. I know I messed up. But you going to the cops, the job stuff, did you really have to go that far? Then a follow-up. I was gonna pay it back. Eventually. I just needed space. You didn't have to turn everyone against me. I stared at my phone, the screen glowing with the words of a boy still too entitled to grasp the depth of what he'd done. Not once did he mention Kai. Not once did he apologize without tying it to his own suffering. I didn't respond. I didn't even type. I just deleted the thread. He tried again. A day later. Voice messages, long and breathy, filled with shallow sobs and layered guilt. Blocked. He didn't deserve my time. My anger. My forgiveness. He didn't deserve access to the life he tried to rob. And Kai? He was already looking forward. Melina came by with takeout that night, and we sat at the kitchen table while Kai packed his surgery bag for the 10th time. She grinned as he showed her his checklist, stuffed lion, coloring books, his favorite hoodie, and a drawing of the Eiffel Tower with a big red X through it. "What's this for?" she asked, holding up the paper. Kai shrugged. "It was a bad tower. I don't need it now." She looked at me, eyes glassy. "Smart kid." I smiled. He always was. Melina was working at the accounting firm now. Irony, I suppose, that she got the job Tanner had lost. But she'd earned it. She stood by us when everyone else hesitated. She never made excuses for him, not even when it would have been easier to protect the peace. She chose justice. As the night wore on, the house felt different. Lighter. Like the walls had finally unclenched. The weight of waiting, of not knowing, of carrying it all alone, it had shifted. We were moving forward. Not just surviving. Living. I stood in Kai's room after he fell asleep, watching him breathe, his bag packed at the foot of the bed. He clutched his lion in one arm and that XD-out tower in the other. And for the first time in months, my body didn't feel like it was bracing for the next hit. Tomorrow, we would drive to the hospital. Tomorrow, the road that had nearly collapsed under us would lead somewhere better. And as I turned off the light, I whispered into the dark, "We're paid in full, son. All of it." The night before the surgery felt like the world had slowed down, as if time wanted to stretch itself out and give me space to breathe. The house was quiet. So quiet, it felt unnatural. Not the kind of quiet that creeps up on you in grief or fear, but something softer, reverent, like the silence knew what tomorrow meant. Kai had gone to bed early, his excitement tucked under the blankets with him. He had insisted on sleeping in his clothes for the hospital, sweatpants, his favorite blue hoodie, and socks with little lightning bolts across the toes. "So I'm ready the second I wake up," he'd said. I didn't argue. There was no room for that tonight. Just nods and reassurances and long, lingering hugs that he didn't even fully understand the weight of. I stayed up. I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers tracing the rim of a coffee mug I hadn't touched in hours, staring at the pile of papers I no longer needed to read. Pre-op instructions, insurance confirmations, schedules, notes. It was all done, all accounted for. The fund was full. The date was set. The surgeon had already checked in via video call earlier that afternoon, offering his confident reassurances and a kind smile for Kai. Everything that had once felt so distant, so unreachable, was now less than 12 hours away. When the knock came at nearly midnight, my heart kicked into overdrive. I wasn't expecting anyone. I crossed the room quietly, careful not to wake Kai, and opened the door to find a small package on the mat. No name, no note on the outside. Just a padded envelope, sealed tight. I stepped onto the porch, looked both ways down the street, empty. Whoever had dropped it off was gone now. I brought it inside, set it on the table, and hesitated. For a moment I thought about just tossing it. But curiosity, it always wins. Inside was a wad of cash, thick but messy. Loose bills, mostly 20s and 50s. On top, a folded piece of notebook paper with only 3 words written in tight, familiar handwriting. "I'm still sorry." No name, but it didn't need one. Tanner. The irony of him waiting until now, after everything, to drop a last-minute gesture on our doorstep wasn't lost on me. $2,000, maybe a little more. I didn't count it immediately. I didn't need it for the surgery anymore. But it wasn't worthless either. I tucked it back into the envelope and set it aside, already knowing where it would go. Therapy. For Kai. For the quiet nights when memories would stir. For the scars that might be deeper than we could see right now. For the future, not the past. The next morning arrived like it had been waiting outside the whole time. Kai bounced down the stairs before my alarm even buzzed. He looked wide-eyed, alive, energy pulsing from every movement like his body already knew what it was about to become. "Are we ready, Dad?" he asked, already gripping the handle of his duffel bag like a miniature explorer. "More than ready," I said, ruffling his hair. "You got your lion?" He pulled it from his hoodie pocket with a grin. "Never leave without him." The drive to the hospital was quiet at first. Kai stared out the window, watching the world roll by, and I kept glancing over, trying to memorize every line of his face. He wasn't nervous. If anything, he seemed more peaceful than I'd ever seen him. He knew where we were going. He knew why. And he believed, deep down, that this was it. His beginning. Halfway there, he turned to me and asked, "Do you think it'll hurt after?" "Maybe for a little while," I answered honestly. "But it'll get better. Every day." He nodded, thinking. Then, after a long pause, he said, "When I can run, I'm gonna run so fast nothing bad can catch me." I had to grip the steering wheel tighter. My throat clenched. I blinked hard and forced a smile. "You better. I'm not sure I can keep up." He laughed, that bright, free sound that could clear clouds. When we got to the hospital, everything moved faster than I expected. Paperwork, check-ins, nurses in soft blue scrubs offering Kai a coloring book and a bright yellow wristband. The surgeon came by again, patting my shoulder and kneeling beside Kai's chair to talk directly to him, explaining the procedure in simple words, pointing to a chart with friendly drawings. Kai listened, nodded, and asked if he'd be able to kick a soccer ball afterward. "Not right away," the surgeon said with a smile, "but soon enough. Maybe even score a goal." Kai pumped his fist. That's what I wanted to hear. Then came the moment. They prepped him for the OR, and I was allowed to walk with him up to the point where the hallway split and parents had to stay behind. He held my hand the entire way, squeezing just enough to remind me he was still trying to be brave. At the double doors, he looked up at me. "Will you be here when I wake up?" "Always," I said. "You go be amazing now, okay?" He nodded. No fear in his eyes. Just trust. Pure and complete. Then the doors opened, and they wheeled him through, the lion tucked beside him, the hood of his blue sweatshirt resting beneath his neck like a pillow. I stood there long after he disappeared from view, hands in my pockets, heart thudding in some slow, echoing rhythm that matched the passing seconds. The nurse returned gently, guiding me toward the waiting room. Hours passed. I didn't read, didn't scroll. I just sat, watching the clock, the windows, the door. Melina arrived partway through with coffee and silence. She sat beside me, didn't ask questions, didn't try to fill the space. Just stayed. When the surgeon finally emerged, mask pulled down, hands clean, the relief in his eyes hit me before he even spoke. "It went beautifully," he said. "He's strong. He's going to do great." I think I exhaled for the first time in 4 hours. Maybe for the first time in months. They let me sit with Kai while he came out of anesthesia. He looked so small, so pale, but peaceful. I held his hand and whispered, "You did it, buddy. We did it." He stirred a little, eyes fluttering open just enough to see me. "Did I fly?" he murmured. I smiled. "You soared." And I knew, whatever came next, whatever hills we still had to climb, this moment was ours. Tanner might never change. The past might always have bruises. But Kai had every chance now. And when he ran, nothing bad would catch him again.